Hey everyone, George here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to another episode of the Win Insider Series. And today was a great interview. We had Adam Bird as our guest. Adam is the Director of Strategy and he's a partner at Deksia and Highway 29 Creative. Adam's also going to be presenting at the North Coast Wine Industry Expo on December 4th at the Sonoma County Fairgrounds here in Santa Rosa. But just a great interview. Adam is one of the most brilliant guys that we've had the opportunity to work with from a marketing and strategy perspective. And I think you're going to get a kick out of some of his thoughts, some of his insights on some of the challenges that we're facing as a wine industry. So thank you for being with us today, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Adam, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm excited for this conversation. For those in the audience, we've worked with Adam doing a little strategy session here at Wine Industry Network, and he's going to be speaking at the Expo. We spoke at Wine Sales Symposium. So in the spirit of transparency, I want to let you know that. But I've been excited to talk to you about this because we're going to get into some wine industry stuff, and I'm going to pick your brain a little bit. But before we get started, just to give the audience a little bit of the lay of the land, talk a little bit about Deksia and Highway 9 Creative and how those two worlds work together.
Yeah, Highway 29 Creative is our wine-specific brand. We serve wineries, typically in the direct-to-consumer space, but we also support with marketing a number of other things, whether or not it's helping wineries work better with distributors with different types of collateral, or whether or not it's whatever it needs to be. Highway 29 Creative is specifically there to serve wines, help sell wine. And then Deksia is our sort of sister company. And Deksia, we're a full-service marketing agency, which I think a better way to think about it is we're basically a full journey marketing agency. We will take control, we will take responsibility for the entire journey from awareness all the way to conversion. And then we serve basically almost every industry because we're more behavioral based. Purchasing is a behavior. How do we influence that behavior and get more of it? And when you start working more with behavior, then you'll find that a lot of the things that work in one place work awfully well in other places. And so Deksia, we do work with people who are within the winery space, like bottlers or people who are selling to the wineries rather than for the wineries who are selling to consumers.
Okay, all right. Now, just to give a little more background on yourself, before you became part of Deksia, you had your own business, Bird and Bird Creative or Bird and Bird Studio.
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about that.
I've actually had a bunch of different businesses. We haven't talked about all of them, but Bird and Bird Studio was the last one that has been absorbed and become a part of Deksia and Highway 29 Creative. Is a commercial photography studio. We worked with Fortune 500 companies, regional companies on the kind of photography they needed. The reason why it turned into my engagement with Deksia is a lot of it was identifying and working with brands on how do we visually express their brand. And from a photography and video standpoint, it's a little bit different than graphic design because it's not about colors. It's really digging into some of the fundamentals of branding. What is the relationship that you are building? What is the story that you are telling? How is it that we are creating something durable between the brand and the audience? And then how do we visually express that? So that work did a lot to roll into my role of doing strategy, brand strategy, messaging strategy, marketing strategy. I also owned a dry erase board manufacturing company and a direct-to-consumer photography brand and some other stuff besides. So, the through line through all of that is the businesses that I have owned that did a good job of marketing did really well. And the businesses that I'd owned that didn't do a very good job of marketing didn't do so well.
We're always entrepreneurial right from the get-go.
Yeah,
that's great.
My mom used to drag me to craft bazaars, like selling antiques, and she also had a business making beaded jewelry. She would buy wholesale beads and then bead them up, and then she would sell them to local retailers. And then she would drag me along, of course, single mom. So I kind of always was around it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good training though, right? I mean, I'm sure you built on that, right? Like look at what you're doing today, right? You kind of build on those experiences of being out there and presenting yourself. So I was researching, getting prepared for our conversation today, and looking at some of the work that you've done at Bird and Bird Studio. like even the headshots you talk about, like, hey, the purpose here is not to just show somebody a picture of you, but to establish some trust. Like when they look, you go, is that somebody I could trust? Is that
Yeah.
somebody I feel like I could work with? And now I need to go redo my headshot and everything else here. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, it's when if you're in a service-based business, then your people are your product, and so then the question is, are you doing a good job of being faithful to the quality of your product when it comes to your prospects? And this is also true for wines. If you're a winery brand, your wine is your product, your tasting room is your product, your vineyard is your product. Are you being faithful to what that is, and in demonstrating that to people? Because if you are, then you're going to get people's expectations are going to be met, and that's really this is a bit of a tangent, but that when we talk about authenticity in marketing, that's what that is. Are you setting an expectation with your audience, and then are you meeting that expectation? And when the answer is yes, then you will be experienced and defined by your audiences as an authentic brand. When you're setting an expectation and then you're not meeting that expectation, then your audiences are going to recognize that you're an inauthentic brand.
Yeah, yeah. Well, some great work there. So does Bird and Bird still exist under the Dexia
Yeah,
umbrella as a separate? Okay, that's interesting.
absolutely.
So was when I don't know if it was a purchase or an acquisition or a merger, but when Highway 29 became part of Dexia, was that your first wine industry exposure to the wine industry?
Depends on how you look at it. I've been drinking wine a long time.
Okay.
Um, No, we have had we've done some work. So Michigan is it doesn't have necessarily a national reputation, but there is a thriving wine industry in Michigan. In the Grand Traverse Bay Area in Michigan has a huge wine industry. I'm not I mean obviously nothing like Napa Valley, but it's one of the major tourist drivers in the state of Michigan. And then we also have a couple of national branded wineries. One of them just south of us in Paw and I am drawing a blank on their name. St. Julian. Um, and so, so I and then we've done some work for some of the Traverse City wineries. We've also done some work for some wineries in Iowa, one in particular, and then we've also done some work for wineries in Washington because there's a pretty thriving wine scene happening in that Pacific Northwest up there, not just in Oregon where a lot of people know the Pinots, but a little bit further north. So we were doing that work before we started to merge with Highway 29 Creative, which was originally based out of Napa Valley, and it was really built as a creative agency to serve the direct-to-consumer wine segment, which was a little bit of a leap on the founder Simon to go in that direction. But I think with the changes in the market, it's proving that direct-to-consumer in a lot of ways is really a critical strategy, a critical part of a growing winery.
So to follow up that kind of basically in two parts. So because you do so much work outside of the wine industry, first part of the question is, how is some of the marketing and strategy work that you do for companies outside the wine industry different from the work that you do within the wine industry? And then the follow up to that is there much difference between some of the work, the marketing strategy work that you're doing with, let's say the wineries in Northern California versus Michigan or Iowa?
Well, so all marketing strategy, all messaging strategy, all brand strategy in general when it comes to growth, it always starts with the audience. Who is the audience? Where is the audience? And what do they want? Everything starts there, and that's different when you're talking about a Puget Sound based winery versus a Sonoma County based winery versus a Grand Traverse County based winery. And so there's absolutely they all have to have social media because you have to be where the audience is, but outside of some of the tactics that are pretty evergreen flavors of social media, um, like one wine club might have a very different allocation schedule and might have a very different approach towards the experience. Like, so we have a client in Washington, and their allocation is purely based on pickup. You want to, pick up if you're in their club and you're going to get your allocation, they're not going to ship it to you. You have to show up, and when you show up, they're going to give you an experience because you're not their tasting room is separate from their vineyard. You're going to go to the vineyard and they're going to have a beautiful table set up with amazing food, and you're going to show up and you're going to hang out and you're going to drink the wine with other members, with the winemaker, with the owners. You're going to get this experience that is baked into the pie. So the allocation isn't just pick up your wine, congratulations, you have, the new stuff for your library or table. It is, more of an event, and it's packaged more as an event. So it's not the same type of email cadence that you would see for an allocation release. It's more of an event driven release, even though it is technically an allocation. And then, we have Sonoma County winery that's extremely boutique, extremely exclusive, we actually have a couple of those. Their allocations are completely different. There is no showing up at the winery because a very small segment of their customer base is, actually living in and around Napa Valley. Most of them are concentrated in the flavors of New York and Texas, maybe Chicago. And so what that marketing looks like is very, very different. The imagery is different. The language is different. It's always based around what are you doing for your audience? What do they want from you? And how do we draw the bridges that connect them? And the adaptability to understand those, it's a lot easier to have when we're also doing work for, for construction companies, or we're doing work for fintech. We've got clients in San Francisco that, have development platforms. Each of those has lessons on how people pay attention and how people buy. And those lessons can be applied across a broad portfolio of companies.
Do you find that when you pick up a new client, and I guess it doesn't matter whether it's within or the wine industry or not, but let's focus on the wine industry for obvious reasons. Are you typically brought in from an owner who's saying, "Hey, we need some help with our marketing, and here's our marketing guy, and see what you can work out," or is it more common that the marketing person says, "I need some help, and I think these guys are somebody we should talk to"? Because I can imagine that can be very two different experiences, right? Sometimes the marketing person who's entrenched, that could be a little bit difficult. So how do you manage that, especially when it comes to the owner brings you in and says, "Here's my marketing guy. She's been with us, or he's been with us for 10 years, but we're not moving the needle." How do you handle that?
Well, so there's oftentimes revenue is a really good indicator of what we're going to get with. If a company is north of 15 to 18 million in revenue, then we're probably not talking to an owner, or we're having a very early introduction to an owner because they saw us at a talk, or they were at I speak at a number of different conferences, and I spend a lot more time talking at like executive roundtables and stuff like that. So they'll become aware of us there, and then they'll bring us back, and then everything, and then that's pretty much that's as far as we relate to the owner. If it's under 15, $18 million, then it's not uncommon to be working with the owner alongside whoever their marketing person or team is fairly closely, because they're small enough where the owner needs to be more engaged. But when there's a marketing team that's already in place, that's always a blessing, because it means that there's a lot of institutional knowledge that we can lean on. And it's what I call a co-marketing situation. And we do a lot of that. We can take over all the marketing. We do that sometimes, but it's also very common for us to do co-marketing with someone internally, which, especially with the complexity of content that's required to kind of get through the noise in the marketplace. And again, this is across pretty much every industry. Having someone internal who can just coordinate things, can make sure that people show up for meetings, do discovery, who can, like if it's a business that has partners, like let's say you're a winery and you're working with a distributor, someone who can work alongside the distributor so that they can make sure that we have what we need and that we're doing is getting pushed to whatever it is that they need. Like if it's a point of sale display, or if we're coordinating OTT ads with a distributor's push for a particular product in a particular marketplace, having that internally is really helpful. And if someone internally hasn't moved the needle, then we're perfectly happy. We would love to get alongside that person, support them and help them, sometimes show them new ways to do things, or in some cases give them new things to do. It all really, unfortunately, I can't give you like a sweeping answer, because it really is different for every organization. But what we have found is that there's an awful lot of value to institutional knowledge. So if someone's been in the marketing seat for 10 years, even if you're not happy with how much they have done growth in the last 2 or 3 years, doesn't mean that their value needs to go away. But it does mean that their value can be used in different ways.
I just know like marketing people sometimes can be notorious for being territorial, right? And
oh yeah, Oh yeah.
So it's like I've been doing this for a long time, and it's just the nature of the beast. And on the flip side, sometimes you'll get a new marketing person that can come in, and it doesn't matter how good a job the person before them was doing. It's out the window, right? It's like everything's got to go. So I imagine it's got to be difficult sometimes. You got to figure out how to navigate that way through that, because you need their buy-in to a certain extent to be able to execute on what you're out there to do.
Well, we part of it. I mean, we're not doctors, but we do have a pretty strong philosophy of first do no harm. So, when we're onboarding a new client, particularly if we're developing a strategy for them, let's if something is working, let's not kill it. I mean, like, I've got a e-commerce client that sells, car parts, and they're pretty big. I mean, they're really big. They've got a they've got a partner that does really great pay-per-click advertising for them that performs really well. Could we do better? Maybe. Is it worth like deplatforming from one company and replatforming with another? No, it's not. Like, we're we would be increasing agency revenue, but at what cost to the client? Especially when you look at the revenue dip that's going to come from moving many millions of dollars of PPC from one agency to another. There will be a dip. Is that dip worth it to the client? They're doing a good job. It's not. Or, they have someone internally who's doing a good job writing blogs, and blogs are an important part of their strategy for driving awareness of the brand. Great, let's keep that person. But let's also figure out how can we work together to, the game that I like to play is yes and. It's not saying no or turning something off. It's saying yes, you're doing a great job of that. And what can we do to amplify those blogs? Can we maybe be doing campaigns on social media where we can be pushing those blogs a lot harder as like early funnel content to generate interest to add to retargeting lists for better, deeper campaigns, around specific products or services? It's, you know, if something is working, then don't mess with it.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's common sense, right? But not so much a common action. So I want to have a little fun with you. So obviously, no big secret, right? Wine industry's, in distress. We're That's probably too strong of a word, but maybe not too strong of a word, depending upon who you ask. But it's
Going through a
challenging.
correction.
Yeah, okay, there we go. It's going through a correction. No one's quite figured out what we need to do. So I started thinking about, and just from my experience working with him, like, what if the wine industry collectively brought in Adam, right? Adam's going to take over. He's going to be our chief marketing officer. Big initiative, Operation Save Wine. Who's in the room for that first conversation, Adam? Like when you do your fact finding, like when you came on, you work with Wine Industry Network. You had a questionnaire we all sort of filled out. It was sort of your information gathering session, right, before we began. Operation Save Wine, big wineries, corporate owned, privately owned, small family owned, big growers, small growers, vendors. Who has to be in the room for that initial conversation, that initial fact finding conversation for you?
I would love to get as representative of a cross section of possible of the wine professionals who directly engage with the wine audiences. So these are going to be tasting room managers. These are going to be club managers. I'm not. I want to. So I believe very strongly that qualitative beats quantitative from a cost per insight standpoint almost every time. The downside is you don't get the confidence of having all these data points, which makes people feel good about decisions. But you don't get rich insights from that. If we can get people in the room that cover a broad cross section, who have a lot of experience talking to and engaging with and doing customer support and customer experience with the audiences that we have, but also with the audiences that we don't have as well as we should. Those 21, 25, 28 year olds, getting those people in, and then let's talk to them. Let's listen to them. More importantly, what are the conversations? Why are people coming in to drink wine? Why are people buying wine from you? Like the guy, we have a fantastic winery shop here in West Michigan in Grand Rapids called Martha's Vineyard. It's a super premium wine shop. I mean, you have to make an appointment to get into the cellar, and the wines up. I mean, and they've got wines as rare and expensive as you could possibly want. Um, they've got guys who work the front counter and they know wine and they sell it to people. I want to talk to those guys. What are the audiences that we don't have as much reach into as we should? What are those ones saying? What are those ones doing? Because a lot of what we have to do is we have to recover from the last 15 to 20 years where the industry did what every industry does, which is follow the incentives, follow the money. And the money was your Gen Xers and your boomers who loved wine, who cultivated libraries of wine, who collected it. That's where the money was. And so there's a huge amount of industry momentum around scores and around reviews. But when you're a 26-year-old, you just got out of grad school, you don't know who Jeb Dunnick is, and you don't know why you would care about Jeb Dunnick because you've not participated in any of that. We've done a fantastic job of maximizing revenue for one particular segment. The thing is, we did very little to nurture the next generational segment. And that's where the correction is coming in because we have optimized so strongly for a fairly narrow audience that we've done so at the exclusion of what is going to eventually be the future of every industry. I mean, we're at a point now where Gen X and millennials together represent more than 50% of purchasing power.
I think that's interesting. We don't hear enough about what the retailers out in the marketplace are saying about their engagements with the consumer or the waiters,
Yeah.
selling wine at a restaurant. And I think that's an important part. And obviously, there's been, there's quite a bit of consumer research out there, but those are gatekeepers that, like I said, I don't think we hear enough from them. We talk to the wineries, especially the small wineries, are maybe overly reliant on people coming into the tasting room, but there's a lot of information to be had from those folks out there.
I want to poke in for one quick second. A lot of market research is based on quantitative approach. So it's sending a survey to an audience. So that audience is qualified on paper, but we're only going to get answers to the questions that we ask. And the reason ultimately why most people kind of go away from qualitative is partly I don't get the numbers that make me feel good on the decision that I'm going to make. And then also, and this is kind of the harsh reality, research logistics sucks. It's just not fun. Research logistics for qual means you've got to actually sit down with people. You've got to get them in a meeting. You've got to talk to them. You have to take that time. You can't just package a survey and then throw a bunch of money at it and then have a platform kick back all of those results, knowing that these are qualified audiences. Like that's all technically correct. But what we need in the wine industry is we need fresh insights. And fresh insights aren't going to come from a survey because we're only going to get answers to the questions we're asking. We still need to find out what are the questions that we're not asking, especially for those young, these young adults, they crave authentic, engaging experiences. Wine does that so well. Wine has been doing that for thousands of years. We need to listen to them more and understand what they need and want more. And then we need to repackage what we're doing so that it can connect better with the world that they're growing up in.
Where do growers fit into solving this problem? What role do they play? Because they tend to be behind the scenes, right? But that's the part of the romanticism of what this industry brings to the table. Where do they fit into this Operation Save Wine for you?
Well, I think it depends on what flavor. Like, if you're an estate grower where you're growing so that you can make your own wine. I do think that pay attention to product market fit. And that's changing a little bit. Heavier, darker, weightier Cabernets are becoming less desired by the younger generations, which makes sense because they don't drink as much wine. They don't have necessarily as much palate experience, and so those kinds of wines aren't as rewarding for them. So there's product market fit that I think needs to be considered carefully. If you're a pure grower where you're growing grapes for auction and for wholesale, then in some ways it's kind of the same. Pay attention to the market and look for product market fit. But in this case, I think it's going to be really working with the wineries that are buying your grapes, and potentially also trying to pay more attention to the distributors. What's selling? What's not selling? The same thing for the winemakers. I think both of them are kind of in the same boat. It's product market fit. Distributors should be getting some pretty good data on what's selling. The downside is the data on what's selling is only what has sold in the past. It doesn't tell us what's going to sell in the future, but it does give us some trend lining. And then, make decisions based on what kind of grapes you're going to grow and how you're going to vent them accordingly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So as I was thinking about the interview and this particular part of the interview, and being familiar with some of the work that you've done with archetypes, you spoke about that at the sales symposium. We talked about that when you work with Wine Industry Network. I started thinking about Operation Save Wine, just having some fun with that, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt like thinking about the archetypes. There probably is no one solution that's going to be work for everybody. It starts to feel a little bit more like a regional approach. So what would work
Hmm.
well for Napa, even Joe, even though we're just over the hill, may not be the same plan that's going to work well for Sonoma or Paso
Hmm.
Robles here in California. What might work here is not necessarily going to be the same playbook for what's working in Michigan or Virginia
Hmm.
or New York. So do you feel like it's not that it's more of like a regional game plan that each region sort of has to have their own game plan and collectively we can move the industry forward, or am I complicating things?
I don't think you're complicating things. I think whatever the whatever winds up working is going to need regional tailoring.
Yeah.
Just because the wine industry in Michigan, it's very strongly tourism dominated. The wine industry in Napa is a hybrid. There's a lot of tourism that feeds into the economic model, but there's also just a lot of wine sales that are done through distributors, that are done direct to consumer through clubs and things like that. And so there's going to be regional tweaking to it. I think, one of the reasons why we are where we are now is that we have not invested in the next generation of wine drinkers, which makes sense. I mean, if you own a business, why would you why would you not chase profit and revenue to go after a group that is not as profitable and doesn't drive as much revenue? Um, Ultimately, but I do think that there's patterns to that generational shift in purchasing behavior, and I think while it needs to be tweaked regionally, some point in the next 1 to 5 years, somewhere in a fairly short horizon, we're going to start seeing some wineries and some distributors, and potentially some restaurants and other people that are participating in the wine industry. I think we're going to see them starting to figure out how to get the younger consumer more engaged. One of the things that I've learned is that there's an awful lot of younger people who are like in the sober curious movement or who are sober, but I've also learned that for an awful lot of them, it's not they're not sober because they have a drinking problem. They're sober out of health optimization, which means they do drink sometimes. They just drink very occasionally. And there's ways to bring them back in the fold by pointing out that wine is not as unhealthy as other drinks, that wine does have these benefits that are pretty well documented. But again, these are messages that we're not really prioritizing to that audience because they're not spending much money on wine. So why would I spend money targeting this audience that doesn't spend much money on wine when even if I'm successful, I'm still not going to get that much money? It's this incentive mechanism is really, really difficult to overcome as a burden for our industry.
Well, what I'm hearing, it's a longer term investment approach, right? But when you talk about investing in the next generation, di unpack that a little bit for me. What does that mean? Give me some examples of what that means to you.
So, uh, so we do work for obviously we do a lot of work for the wine industry. We had a client that's I don't want to name them because I don't want to uh, say anything untoward, but they sent us probably about 12 or 15 wines from their library. This is a winery that's been in Napa Valley for the better part of almost 50 years. And so we had wines from their library going back to like I think 2002, up to wines that were just a couple of years old. And then we had a sommelier from our local super premium wine retailer come in, and he did a guided tasting with all of our staff. And we're in marketing, so a number of people who work here are in their early to mid 20s. They loved it. They absolutely loved it. They got to taste the progression of wine. They got to taste the aging of wine. They got to see what it was like to have a 23-year-old wine versus a 2-year-old wine, and they got to have that experience. And it part of the purpose was we wanted to help them market the wine. But one of the knock-on effects of that I was quite surprised by was how many of our people wound up as a consequence of that buying more wine because now because the Gen Y and Gen Z, our millennials and the little bit younger, these are experience driven people. And the thing with the tasting room is it comes with a lot of burden, right? You're going to a wine tasting room. There's a lot of implicit expectation being put on them. So what can we do instead to go to them and offer, not necessarily, this is not a particularly attainable experience, but what can we do to kind of demystify wine and show them what it means? One of the other barriers, talking with some younger friends of mine who are not much for wine drinking, they don't like wine because they bought some wine and they didn't really care for what they bought, and they're overwhelmed by all the choices. They have no idea what's good palate fit, and so we have to help these people, and they want that help because they want the thing. What wine does is it gives people an experience that they can collectively share. When I have friends over, I open a bottle of wine. We all share that bottle together. Everyone gets it poured in their glass. I don't do that with beer. No one shares my beer. No one shares my cocktail. No one shares my mocktail. No one shares my juice. Like wine is unique. And then, wine as a social lubricant, the way it relaxes people, the way that it lets us be relaxed and remove some of those social anxieties, particularly for the anxious generation. There's real utility to this. But we have to reach them where they are rather than where we want them to be. And we have to invest. This is why I think, like the Save the Wine Industry initiative, I think it needs to be a trade association thing, because the economic model is not going to reward any wine producer or distributor in investing in the kind of marketing that is required to bring awareness and exposure to the experience of wine to that next generation of wine consumers. It has to be something where it's a collective effort, because just it's hard for me to go to one of my clients. They do 2,000 cases a year. It's and they sell out every single year. And saying, I need you to carve out 20% of your budget to go after the next generation of consumers who are, you're going to take a revenue hit. And it's going to take 15 years before they're going to come into fullness of purchasing, or 10 years. I can't do that for them.
Right, right. No, I completely agree with you. It's a trade initiative. And it's funny, as you were speaking, I wrote demystify plus education plus experience, right? But to your point, it's not that's not an initiative that any one brand, I don't care how big it is, can take on. It's a team effort. It's the wine industry, the wineries, it's our distributors, it's our retailers, it's our restaurateurs, I think, collectively, to find ways to accomplish that with our younger consumers. I keep waiting for those 20-somethings to have children and a bigger mortgage. I think that'll help drive some wine consumption as well, right? They're going to need to relax at some point. One of the interesting things about our situation, and I said this at our sales symposium, a lot of times you've got a product problem, right? We don't really have a product problem, right? Our product, our growers are doing as good a job as they ever have in terms of
wine has never been this good.
Yeah, it's fantastic, right? It's up to our marketers to, I think, figure this out. And do you get a sense from the work that you're doing that you're seeing some momentum around on the trade side of like making sense of like the example you just gave? Hey, listen, we need to get out there. We just need to educate these younger folks a little bit more. We need to remove some of the intimidation that is inherent to the wine industry. Are you seeing anything out there along those lines that makes you feel good about where we're going?
I can't make my clients, push significant budget towards these younger audiences because it would be irresponsible from a bottom line standpoint. But what we have been doing across our portfolio of clients is we've been recommending as much as possible and pushing and pulling as much as possible more lifestyle, like help that younger audience understand how wine is a part of a thriving and healthy lifestyle. And so that means, images of people collectively socializing and having a good time with wine, as opposed to the sexy bottle shots and the sexy glass shots, which is what a lot of our clients and a lot of the wine industry is doing, because that's the product, right? But the audience that's collecting those wines, where they're buying a couple of cases, that's what they want. They want to see that bottle. They want to see that glass. That's the experience that comes with how they see the world and experience the world. But for these younger generations, they're experience driven because they have limitless information literally at their fingertips. but what they don't have is limitless experience. And I don't just mean in an age standpoint. You can have access to Disney World. It's not the same thing as experiencing Disney World. You can, and they know that. They know that in some cases instinctively, and they know it in some cases overtly. And so, moving more into a direction of lifestyle, what kind of lifestyle do you lead? Wine should be a part of that lifestyle. I think there's a lot more that our industry can do with influencers. But here's the thing: is it's not wine influencers because they're just preaching to the choir. It's the adjacent influencers. It's the influencers who do cooking. It's the influencers who do crafting. It's the people who are not doing wine but are doing things around wine. People who are into organic foods or gardening or the slow down movement, any number of things. Those influencers, let's help those people discover the joys of wine, and more importantly, the joys of sharing wine. Think of all the podcasts that everyone is listening to right now, right? I mean, wouldn't it be better if that podcast maybe they had a glass of wine? Obviously brand appropriate and everything else. We've got to bring it back into the culture, but the way to do that is through a lifestyle standpoint. The prestige and social status standpoint, that's always going to have a role and a place, but we lean too hard on that. We need to do more to show people the way that this fits into your lifestyle. Your lifestyle is improved. Your lifestyle is better with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of reminded me of an email I got. Somebody pitched us on doing a story about the number of universities out there that offer like a wine appreciation class, and how it's a tough class to get into because there's always a wait list because there's a tremendous amount of curiosity. It's not a place that you would think, obviously everyone needs to be, of legal age, but it's not the first place you would think of as a wine industry to engage with the wine curious. But the statistics that they showed about, I go, gosh, maybe this is something the wine industry should be getting behind is,
Oh my God,
supporting
yeah.
these programs at these universities where these young people want to learn about wine in an environment where it's okay. You're taking a class, you don't know that anything. That's what the purpose of the class is
Yeah.
for, right? So it's something that I think we should be paying. And it's another area we can be paying a little more attention to.
There's the desire to relax with friends is universal and ageless.
Yeah.
Just is. But we've, as an industry, we've marketed wine so heavily towards these scores and these reviews and the status and these kinds of things that we haven't entirely lost that, but it isn't, you know, the we have to meet the generation where they are, and we have to remind them why wine has been such a part of the human social experience for kind of literally as long as we've had grapes. And what you just said about the schools having wait lists for wine appreciation classes, that's as clear of a call as there is, that there is definitely a market demand there. We just need to make a ramp so that people can figure that out, because once, like, my wife was not much of a drinker of wine, and then I want to say maybe about 10 years ago, we were out for dinner and she tried a glass of wine and she really, really liked it. And then she discovered that there's a very particular style of cab that she really, really loves. So guess what we have several cases of now. And
Yeah.
and she enjoys it, and she enjoys having friends over and having that wine with those friends. But that palate fit is something that we have to overcome. And we have to get rid of some of the stigma. It's okay if someone likes a sweet white wine. That's fine. Your palate is you. Some people don't like rap or death metal. That's okay too.
Right. Well, I think you have someone like your wife is a perfect example of a great wine ambassador, right? So someone they're not making any money on the wine that they're sharing with their friends, but they're sharing with the friends. Many of those may not be that familiar with wine either, but it's someone that they trust. It's a safe environment, and it's okay for them to discover whether they like that or they don't like it. But versus the alternative, which can be a
We
little
have
intimidating.
we have to make it okay for someone to not to say this wine isn't for me,
Right.
and then immediately provide them with a different flavor of wine, a different type of wine.
Yeah.
Because what happens right now, and I see this when we go out to a fancy place, if she tries a 99 point wine, and then she's like, she's like, this is just not like, this is not agreeing with me. Oh my God. Like, the waiter's just like daggers at her. And I understand it's an expensive glass of wine, but like, I mean, palate is so personal and unique. We need to celebrate the diversity of palate, and we need to help people find the wine that is for them and not judge them for not liking a wine that has this incredibly high score, that's incredibly rare or incredibly aged. We have to open up and make it okay for someone to explore and find the wine that's for them.
Yeah, one of the things that I was able to experience that I wish a lot of the general consumers could have experienced. And I was working for Jim Beam. Jim Beam had a big wine division at the time, and there
Mm-hmm.
was a big tasting with, I think there was like 12 winemakers or 13 winemakers and maybe 6 or 7 marketing people, along with some other very experienced, wine tasters in the room. And we went through, and I forget what we were tasting, Bordeaux blends, it might have been. And then we ranked them all. It was like 20 different wines. And I was terrified because I was felt like I know I'm going to get it wrong. I know I'm absolutely not going to be on the same page with these guys. And my assumption was everyone was going to rank these wines in generally in the same order. And it
Mm-hmm.
was so refreshing to see that when we actually unveiled the results on an individual basis, they were all over the place. I mean,
Yeah,
nobody agreed, and these were some top tier winemakers, and I left that meeting feeling like so much better about, what, it's all about personal taste, and it
it
doesn't
is.
matter. That's all that matters is feeling comfortable with what you like.
And um we've got to, like, we just have to make that more accessible. When I like I had I mean it was like a revelation. I used to live in Europe, and I was in southern France, and I had a rosé for the first time in the summertime. I was like, oh my lord, what have I been missing out on? Yeah, I mean, this is 25 years ago. Rosés weren't as common as they are now. um and now, like, this is the summer staple in our household. um because it's just such a good summer wine. And I have some friends who are serious wine collectors, very serious wine collectors. And when I tell them about, like, I get excited, we got our case of rosé, they're like, what? Because you can't put it in your library for 10 years. You basically got to drink it season of. And
Yeah,
and then they're like, well, are you a rosé drinker? It's just, and then Phil, it's like, when I'm sitting in my garden, after a long day of work, there's nothing better than feeling some sun and some rosé.
yeah, I'm
And
with you on that.
it's got to be for that product market fit. Like, we have to respect what the market wants, but we also have to make room for the market to understand what they want. And this is the hard part on wine, is it has to be done on an individual basis. Because
Yeah,
honestly, the wine that I like is not really the wine that Maya likes. We have two different wine racks with, like, his and hers.
yeah, that's great. So, Adam, you're going to be speaking at the North Coast Wine Industry Expo on December 4th here in Sonoma County, Santa Rosa. Your session's Cultivating a Timeless Wine Brand in Changing Times. Pitch that session for me. What are people going to learn at that session? What are some of the takeaways?
The the times are changing very quickly, especially the mediums with which our marketing is being done, the channels that we market to people. And so the magic trick is not actually necessarily adapting your brand, because then you become disingenuous. Because your brand is not just your colors or your looks. It's, how do you answer the phone? It's, how do you do your order to allocation? What is your tasting room experience like? What is your all these things? The collective experience that you offer is your brand. And so what brands need to be doing is not necessarily reinventing who they are as a brand, but really it's understanding what is our foundation of a brand. And then how do we reinvent the delivery of that? So maybe that means that you need to be doing something on, referencing again, the winery in Washington State that does those unique sort of food and dinner experience based allocations. They their winemaker has a video blog that he posts regularly, and it's day in the life of a winemaker. And it's very on brand for them. It's also fascinating because there's not a lot of winemakers doing this. So, like, there's days where he's got his, Wellington boots on. And it's raining all day long, and he's like, we're out here fixing a drainage ditch so that our vines don't drown, and that's today's work. Um, and it resonates though, because it's, because they're an approachable brand. It's an everyman brand. Their idea is that wine should be something that everyone can do, and they're being true to that. They weren't doing this kind of thing 5 years ago.
Right.
And so what is your foundation? What is your core as a brand and the experience that you create and maintain with your audiences? Like, what is that authenticity? And
Yeah.
then how do you use the new and evolving mediums to share that? Or maybe it's how do you reject some of those mediums and you embrace older, more analog approaches? I do think there's a pretty strong role in the winery business for direct mail to come back, specifically because people don't really do mail anymore. The
Right.
direct mail now is all flavors of like, Menards or, kind of like big box circulars with coupons and stuff. And so getting a really nice envelope with a really nice, well thought out letter in it or, card that's on brand that really perpetuates the authenticity and relationship that brand has with its audience, it has a possibility to move people. But this is what it's about really is that, the market is changing. Um, you know, the brand needs to be built so that it can be durable in the changing times. It can, it's not about reacting to trends, it's about looking at the trends saying, how can we incorporate that in a way that is authentic and true to us?
Yeah.
And the answer is going to be different for every brand. But the big part of my talk is really understanding about the role of infrastructure in that. You've what is the infrastructure of your brand? What is the storytelling? And then how do you repackage those stories for the new mediums and for the new expression? You're still the same brand. It's still the same moral of the story. It's still the same lessons. It's still the same value. Um, but it's really impossible to adapt to the changing times. The tactics you're using, not the brand itself, unless you have a
Yeah.
really good foundation of understanding who are we,
Yeah.
what is true to us. Like, so brand archetypes that you mentioned earlier, I think are a really fabulous tool for that. What is the archetype of your brand? Are you a jester brand? Are you a hero brand? Are you a
Right.
sage brand? The beautiful thing about that is that it's easy to then give brand training to non-marketing people who are an important part of your brand, people who touch customer experience.
Yeah. It's funny. You just listen. It's like makes me just. I keep thinking like, be true to yourself. Like, who am I? Be true to
Yeah.
yourself, and stay the course. And you don't need to appeal to everybody, right?
No, you need to
It's
appeal to your market.
you'll find your crowd.
That's the power of today's technology, is that it's really good at connecting whoever with whoever their crowd or community is.
Right.
But you have to invest in it. You have to participate on that platform consistently over and over and over again in order for the algorithms to make the connection between you and your crowd.
Yeah. Well, this is great. This has been great. I'm looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks in
Same.
person. For anyone that's interested in getting a hold of you and talking a little bit more about, working with Highway 29 Creative or Dexia, what should they do?
Uh, highway29creative.com or dexia.com, just hit the contact and then just, throw into the notes that you want to talk to Adam. I'm, always excited to help any business go overcome the barriers and hurdles that they have to growth. So, anyone who's listening to this, if you have questions or looking for help, I would love to talk to you.
Great. Well, listen, thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks so much, George.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation we had with Adam. I know I certainly did. And he really is one of the smartest marketing strategy guys we've had the opportunity to work with. And again, if you're interested in hearing Adam's presentation in person, you can go to wineindustryexpo.com and get tickets for the expo. It's going to be at the Sonoma County Fairgrounds in Santa Rosa on December 4th. And it's going to be a great session, as you could tell if you watched today's interview. If you are looking for a little more information about Dexia or Highway 29 Creative, you can go to hwy29.com or dexia.com and just fill out the contact form and they'll get a hold of you. But once again, thank you for joining us. I hope you liked it. Make sure you like our YouTube channel and we'll keep you informed and updated on the next episode of our Insider Series. Thanks, everybody.